All right. It is 5 o'clock, so I think we'll get going. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I do acknowledge that there's a bunch of people which are continuing to come in, which is fantastic. Just by way of introduction, I am Patrick Sears. I'm the Managing Director of the Westport program for Stage 3. Today, what we're embarking on, I guess, is the first of a series of community webinars. We've done a lot of engagement with stakeholders and with different people throughout the last 18 months to help us to get to where we are with the program. But now we've got some clear sort of scope and some clear concept designs. We really want to start to share this information out with the wider community as we approach business case towards the middle of this year. So what we wanted to do today is to give yourselves a bit of a sort of a high level. This is what Westport 101 is. This is where we're at with the program to a high level. And that'll lead into a series of presentations which will follow where we get into a bit more detail in terms of, I think the next one is around the EIA process, around marine science and other activities as we go through the process. So as I said, today is about a Westport overview for yourselves. And what I'll do is I'll talk for about 20 minutes around the high level picture of what Westport is. For those of you who are dialing in for maybe the third or fourth time to hear me talk about it, apologies if this is boring and stuff you've heard before. But we really want to go back to everyone who's dialing in for the first time just to give them a bit of an understanding of where we're at. As I said, there will be meetings, further sessions such as this with some of our specialists to brief you on particular aspects of the project moving forwards. Now today, all the cameras and microphones will be disabled while I'm talking through the presentation. And this is really because we want to record this and be able to provide it on our website for people who can't dial in today, picking up the kids or who knows what they're up to. And obviously that's part of making sure we protect your privacy as well as making sure we've got something that we can put onto the website so other people can hear about it. There will be a Q&A session afterwards, and I think you can type in your questions as we go through, and then I'll just go through them as I get to as we get to the end of the presentations and try and respond to as many as I can in the time. Now, what I will do is if there's any specific questions about things which are going to be discussed in more detail, for example, next week about EIA, for example, I'll probably just defer that and then encourage you guys to come back to listen to Matthew Jones, who's going to take us through that in more detail. And again, if some of the questions get very technical about certain aspects, what we'll do with that is to say, well, maybe if people are interested in this, we'll organise a session on that in the future as well and come back to some of that detail. Otherwise, we'll be here for 4 or 5 hours, and that's not going to work for a project like this. All right, moving on. So what is Westport? So as most of you will be aware, back in 2020, late 2020, the state government, after consideration of a range of different locations for a port to build West Australia's resilience and capacity for trade over the next century, identified a land-backed port at the end of Anquetil Road as the preferred option. The Westport program was then formed to take that sort of strategic option, if you like, and then develop a business case and get ready for all the development that would have to happen after that business case if government decides to proceed with the project. And so what my job is really to lead a group of some of the smartest public servants we've got around the place and a whole bunch of other people working together to come up with the best plan for how we're going to continue the container trade in and out of Western Australia for the next century. And so that's really our job at this stage. We're on track to deliver a business case to the state government at the middle of this year. That'll talk to the timing, the delivery approach, environmental issues and other things to actually allow government to make a sensible, informed decision about how to take forward Westport into the future. So going back to a bit of basics, why do we need to move container trade to Kwinana? So first of all, I think it's important to note that we have one container terminal, or 2 container terminals, 2 stevedores, but one container port on the western side of the continent. So our entire economy and our entire society is entirely dependent on this one gateway of goods going in and out in terms of our export economy as well. It's critical to our way of life. The vast majority of everything we have in our houses comes to us in containers, and obviously making sure that that's efficient is crucial to make sure we're not paying a little bit of extra money every single time we buy something because of inefficiency, which on its own doesn't seem very much, but you stack that up for every buying decision we make for the next century and it becomes quite material. So we have one container terminal on the western side of the continent, and it is utterly essential that it operates efficiently and it can scale with the economy and scale with growth as we go. Now, trade growth and increasing ship sizes and other things will make Fremantle unworkable into the future. Now, part of our job is to figure out when that time is, when that optimal time transition is. Fremantle's been a fantastic port. It's quite efficient as in terms of a national picture, and which is great because what we're not trying to do is to say we need to move today. If we get to that point and we haven't done all the planning we're doing now, and we haven't done the approvals, and we haven't done all of that thinking about how you would deliver a port and a supply chain like this, and you get to the point where you need one, then the state would be in a lot of trouble. So what our job is to do the planning well in advance of what we need when we've got to need the port, so we can have an orderly program to deliver at that time when it's optimal for the state. But ultimately, Fremantle has been a great port. It's fantastic, but it's become gentrified. It's become urbanised around it. We've got our logistics coming in and out, trucks and trains, starting to hit up against inefficiencies and congestion, and that's only going to get worse as the population increases around Perth. So we've got to plan for the future. Why Kwinana? Well, again, there's a lot of analysis was done about options down south in Bunbury and other locations, but Kwinana has a lot more industrial land, obviously, where businesses and industry can grow up around the port. There's no free industrial land around Fremantle, of course, because it is one of our oldest settlements, but there's over, I think, 1,400 hectares of potential developable land around Kwinana where industry can set up, as they do around most ports around Australia. The Kwinana is actually part of our thriving outer harbour. So we have 8 different major wharfs and operations there. We have about 850 ships, bulk carriers go in and out of Kwinana every year. So it's really sort of putting industry where industry is and getting it away from where housing is and other people. It provides us the opportunity to have safer and more efficient road and rail connections. As you would know, they've got a single rail line out of Fremantle at the moment that goes through the Roundhouse and the tourism district. And that's great. It's still got capacity, but it's going to run out, and we won't be able to fit any more trains through that in about our modelling around the early 30s to mid 30s. And then everything would have to switch onto road. And as you know, the only road connections out of there are along Leach Highway. So moving to Kwinana allows us to build freight design freeways, so you can have safe movement of large trucks in and out, and that can scale over time. It's also moving to Kwinana provides a catalyst for the evolution of the Western Trade Coast. As I said, there's a lot of land there. We've got a lot of interest from defence. We've got a lot of interest from shipbuilding, of processing materials. But having a port in that location as well, in terms of container port, will really stimulate the growth of that area. And that is one of the largest economic drivers of our state. I think it's at about an $18 billion a year industry sector, which can only grow for us in that location. And I guess finally is the opportunity for the long term, which obviously long term because it will take place after Westport only start, for the redevelopment of the Fremantle Inner Harbour site. So there's a lot of work going on through our colleagues in the Future Fremantle program, and there's a substantial opportunity to have a lot of jobs and a lot of people in the consolidated metropolitan area, rather than putting people sort of 50, 60, 70 kilometres away at the fringes of Perth, which is what we're going to need to think about into the future if we can't find ways to enhance consolidation of the Perth footprint. So taking all that into account, really what we wanted to do with Westport is not just to focus on just containers and just the port and just the road. We could do that and you could come up with one solution, but a program as big as this has an opportunity to create a lot of other benefits for the state. And there's also a lot of other implications of it that we needed to think about carefully to make sure we do the job right, and we do it once, do it at the right time, and we do it well. So we've designed these Westport goals at the very beginning of the program, and everything we've done in terms of the design or the consideration of what direction we go with a bit of infrastructure or environmental management or whatever else it might be, we bring it back to these goals and say, if we achieve these, we're achieving a really good outcome for the state, and we'll make sure we have an economy that can scale into the future. So I won't go through all of them, but obviously better trade outcomes is crucial, and that's the reason we're here. And it's not just about efficiency, it's actually about scalability and making sure that the supply chain we build now can scale for the next century of growth. It needs to be resilient to all the future challenges and increase reliability of the supply chain as well. We need to create new economic opportunities, so enabling the Western Trade Coast growth, Coast's growth is really important. And some of the decisions we've made around some of how the road and the rail infrastructure will be designed has really lent into that, about making sure that, you know, we've got roads there that, sure, it's going to facilitate all the container trucks, but there'll be even more trucks that are the existing industry sectors are going to utilise to get in and out of that location. And we've listened to industry about what they need in that location too. Of course, we now want this to be the most sustainable port in Australia. We in the Westport office are keenly aware, and we're actually all sort of advocates for actually making sure that this is the best possible port in terms of environmental protection we can possibly do. Cockburn Sound is an incredibly important asset for all West Australians, but obviously many of the West Australians who live down around that neck of the woods. But even for ourselves and people on the team, we all enjoy that location. So we're really interested in making sure that we take care of it as best we can in our development. And that's really why we've designed the project in the way we have. You cannot avoid having a substantial impact of a project this scale, but you can really do a lot to minimise it if you make the right decisions around staging, timing, not rushing, and being very careful with what you do. We want to benefit local people down in that community, as I said, stimulating economic growth, but, you know, the local community as well as people. And we want to make sure that when we do design these new roads and networks, is that it's safe for all the people down in that area as well. And that means designing roads and designing rail lines for the purpose they are, which is heavy freight, rather than having to co-locate heavy freight and commuters on roads such as Leach Highway and others which have been grown up around them. So taking these goals, we went back a few steps to sort of say, okay, there was great work done in stage 2, but there were some questions that they sort of identified. And if you go back and look at their report, questions that needed to be answered, things like, do we need a breakwater and other aspects? How can this work with the utilities in the area? And so we've gone back and done a huge amount of work to try and answer all those questions. And we've done that and then gone beyond it to actually to help us look at all the different ways and configurations a port or a rail or a road network could be configured to make sure we're picking the best one for Western Australia and the ones that best deliver against those goals I just showed you. So we actually went through and looked at 30 different port configurations and layouts and came down to a long list of 7, further analysed that with a lot of environmental and cost information to come down to 3 to get us to our preferred design. And we did the same thing on the land side, making sure that we're going to get the containers to where they need to be, because it's you know, as we said with Fremantle Port, it's not about just having the port capacity, it's about the whole network working, and that's the way we get real benefits for the state. So it's important that we spend as much time looking at the land side as it was on the marine side. So all that culminated in us being able to have a preferred option, preferred concept design launched by the Deputy Premier at the end of last year, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But first of all, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the stuff that went into some of these decision making. So this is not just a bunch of us sitting in a room, you know, thinking about what might be right. You know, we spent a huge amount of this. I think it was about $13.5 million worth of marine science, plus a raft of other environmental programs and physical programs, wave action, wind action, everything that was done in Cockburn Sound and around it, not just to understand the environmental impacts, but also to understand the operability of the port. How's it going to perform in storms? How's it going to perform in wind? How's it going to perform to make sure that we've got a port that will operate in all conditions most of the time? And I think our operability is over 90% at the moment in the concept design, which is fantastic. But we've done a lot of this work because, again, we want to make sure that the port we design, not just the port we design, but the construction process of developing the port, yes, we'll have an impact, but we want to do it in a way that we can all be confident, yourselves and us and the regulators, that several years after the port's finished, the Cockburn Sound will be able to come back and recover and be a thriving environment going forwards. We also spent a lot of time with community mapping where everyone enjoys the Cockburn Sound, whether it be divers or people who like on the beach. A lot of work with recreational fishers to understand where they go. You know, a lot of science work as well in terms of where snapper aggregate and all of those sort of things to make sure we could minimise or avoid those impacts. And that really helped us understand what those where those areas are that people would enjoy the sound, what we needed to do about it if we were going to impact on those as well. And obviously cultural as well. You know, closing the gap is important to everything in Western Australia and in Australia at the moment. So there's been a lot of work with the traditional owners down in the Kwinana area to understand their important places and help us to avoid those where we possibly can. So that has allowed us then work. So we got that information and then a huge amount of engagement with stakeholders. We're designing something for the business sector to operate. So we've been really working very closely with industry, very closely with local governments, Commonwealth governments and others, environmental NGOs, Cockburn Sound Management Council, a whole range of people and local communities in terms of these surveys to give us this information. So that when we design things, we know that it's going to be working for the people that are going to use it. It's not about designing something for us, it's designing something for yourselves and designing something for all the people who operate this supply chain. So there's been a huge amount of work in that space and something I'm really proud of. So ultimately, this was what was launched by the Deputy Premier last year. There will be an existing deep water channel obviously coming and a second channel into Cockburn Sound. This is located largely on the existing channel into This will be largely located on the existing channel that Fremantle Port services, and then when we have to go across the banks, it'll be mapped into some of the old dredging areas that have been developed over time. There will obviously now be a breakwater. We've done that work to identify. Right? So we've done the work to identify that a breakwater will be required to ensure that ships can unload as much time as they need. That was a question which was identified as needing answering in the Stage 2 report. We've moved the port to the south and we've changed some of the landside logistics network where instead of developing Anketel East, which wouldn't have that many people using it on day one, we're going to widen Kwinana Freeway and Roe Highway. And that will not only allow the trucks to move to where they need to get to, but it would actually really reduce the congestion in that location. So it adds us 10,000 trucks to 120,000 cars, which are already using it every day, but increases the actual number of lanes by 50%. So it's a fantastic outcome to be able to achieve that. In terms of the preferred design of the terminal, you people who would have seen the 2020 option that was put out in Stage 2, which was put out subject to a fair bit of work that we've had to do, and that was always the case. So the port has moved substantially to the south of that. Now, there's a range of reasons for that. It avoids us energy infrastructure and water infrastructure to an extent. But one of the fundamental things you can see on the right-hand side here is that it moves the entire port and all of the turning basins in the breakwater out of where the seagrass is. So we have no direct impact on seagrass in the location, and the port and all the turning basins are moved down to an area where there's effectively just sand at the bottom of Cockburn Sound at that point. So that's a great outcome where we can sort of say we're having no direct impact on seagrass in Cockburn Sound, and obviously we're doing a huge amount of work to understand how we can carefully dredge so that there's no indirect impacts, or minimal indirect impacts, I should say, in Cockburn Sound as we move forward. Anketel, obviously Anketel West will be one of the first starters, which is one of the reasons why I've just put it up here in terms of what would be built. We need to build Anketel Road, because it's one of the top priorities for industry in the Western Trade Coast, to have this key connection out of the Western Trade Coast to our major arterial routes, and B, because we needed to build the Kwinana Bulk Terminal, which is clipped to the south of the container terminal, and then to build the terminal as well. We need this access, so we're not driving huge amounts of construction trucks and other things through the local streets to get to this location. Again, that safety for the community is very important to us. So this is the outline of, there'll be a number of grade separations and interchanges built along Anketel Road. And again, that'll benefit as many other freight operators and heavy industry as it will Westport going forwards. So what's next for Westport? So as I said, the concept design was selected and endorsed by the government at the end of last year. We will be referring to the EPA in about in the coming months. So that referral is not the submission for assessment. That's referral just going to the EPA saying, all right, we're going to do this project. What level of assessment would you like? Our level of assessment, we're already asking for the highest level. The business case will be handed in the middle of this year to government. They'll assess it. They'll go through Infrastructure Western Australia and Infrastructure Australia independent assessment, and that'll be reported on, so government can make a decision on what their next steps are at the end of this year. If they proceed, then it'll be submitted to the EPA for proper public environmental review, which will involve weeks to months of public comment periods, so everyone can comment on what our proposals are to manage the environment. And subject to those approvals being given, obviously delivery would start from that point on. So It's going to be a long project. One of the things we've done is by really carefully looking at our construction strategy to manage the environment and to avoid overheating the construction market and to make sure we build things in an orderly way that benefits other people while we're developing the port, as well as understanding the fact that there is the opportunity to push back the port from the early 2030s because Fremantle does have good capacity, is that we are sort of looking at the late 2030s in terms of delivery being completed at the earliest. And of course, this is subject to the government making a business case decision that that's when they want to go. So that's pretty much the briefing I want to provide you. Next week, I will deep dive into the marine environmental impact assessment process with Matthew Jones. Following from that, and these have been sort of planned because of feedback we've had from yourselves and others about this, what people would like to know about. We'll do a little bit more information about the WAMSI science and what that has found. We've got a pop-up at the Kwinana Marketplace on the 23rd of February, so get down if you'd like to have a chat with our team. It's this Friday. And then we're also at Coogee Live on the 9th and 10th of March as well. So these are some of the events. We've had, obviously the team's been out talking to people that are down at the Horse Beach a couple of weeks ago. We're talking to all the people there who enjoyed taking their horses down to that location to get everyone together to have some more other sessions. But I encourage you to get involved in these sort of things. And if there are any other questions or things you'd like to know about, please send that through. I'll look at it in the questions and we might construct another session later on to deal with some of those questions. All right, so, and just finally, just wanted to put this up and I'll leave it up for a couple of minutes while I wrap up. This is just so everyone who hasn't subscribed at the moment can subscribe if you're interested in seeing more information coming through about Westport. We've opened up a Facebook page recently so people can sort of say, see what's going on in the wider community now that we've got some concepts designs. So I'd encourage you just to have a look at this and then and get in touch and subscribe if you'd like to know more. All right, Q&A. So if I can make this work. There we go. Okay. Any words about rail upgrades and expansions? Thank Fred. So part of the concept design includes the duplication of rail up in the Forestry and Kewdale area to allow a greater amount of containers to move along rail in that location and get into some of the new intermodal terminals. And also duplicating the line between Coburn and Triangle and Kwinana. So obviously from Coburn up to Forestfield, it's already duplicated. We've obviously got the single rail line at some point entering into Fremantle. We're really looking at duplicating that all the way onto the port so that we can maximise the amount of containers on rail and minimise on road as required. And that'll obviously include a bunch of signalling, and also there will be the removal of 3 or 4 key level crossings to allow trains to move efficiently up and down the rail network alongside CBH and the wheat crops, but also to ensure safety for commuters as they're crossing rail lines into the future. Ian's identified that staging will be very important for Fremantle. If car trades can be moved to North Quay prior to the full relocation of Kwinana, the long-awaited redevelopment of Victoria Quay can proceed earlier. Indeed, Ian. So as I said, there's several parallel initiatives. Part of Westport is solving for one problem. It creates the opportunity of the redevelopment of the Fremantle Inner Harbour. The work that's being done by our colleagues in planning for the future of Fremantle and the Department of Transport in terms of the future of the non-container trades is working really closely together about staging options for non-container trades in terms of potentially staying within the Inner Harbour for a period, but certainly about what can be done in terms of Victoria Quay as soon as possible to activate that area, and then to come up with a clear plan about how the redevelopment would happen over time as trades can move out of Inner Harbour. John has asked, could you share the steps and grants are being taken towards the goal of local economy? Sorry, should I read out the questions or can people see them? Okay, sorry, I didn't realise if you couldn't see it. But John asked, could you share the steps and grants are being taken towards the goal of local economic growth, leveraging WA's technological innovation, and how local tech companies can be considered for the operation of this port, not just the construction? There are local companies with container terminal automation innovation, but as far as I'm aware, discussions leveraging WA's technology into the operations phase or incentives for terminal operators have been delayed as Westport is still in the design phase. Absolutely right, John. So obviously what we are doing is in a couple of areas. We're designing a supply chain that will be operated by the private sector. So what we need to do is to signal to the private sector the things that we'd expect them to achieve, or the performance that we want them to achieve, to make sure that Western Australia benefits economically from this. And that could be anything from throughput and efficiency, which would be a normal relationship between, let's say, stevedores, but could be IMT operators as well, all the way through to we want you to become net zero by this time, which would drive them towards more electric or other technologies. So we're at the moment doing an innovation strategy, which is about how, to your question, how do we best leverage the technological innovation in Western Australia and elsewhere to get the best out of our supply chain? Because it's not just building the infrastructure, it's what sits on top of the infrastructure and how it works. So we're doing that strategy about how we engage the private sector, because it's not for government to really do innovation for the private sector. And we want to be able to work with, I guess, companies like yourselves and others in terms of what opportunities there are as we go through the project. If this is up and running by the end of the 2030s, that's a long time, and it's such a great opportunity to innovate, not just in terms of materials and for construction to get to net zero or use recycled materials, but as you said, the technological innovation. So we'll think about grants or other processes in that strategy, and what we'll do is we'll try and organise something with the innovation sector to come and talk about a draft of that so they get a better understanding of what we're doing. Vanessa's asked a quick query on the design. How much of the horse beach will be removed to the north, and will there still be public access? So at the moment, the port does impact on the horse beach. And so one of the things I'll do, Vanessa, is we'll take your details. There's going to be quite a detailed conversation with all the horse users. As I said, we were down there the other week trying to get everyone's details, and I think there's been a Facebook page where we put out a message to try and gather everyone together. We're looking to have a dedicated session with the horse beach users in March, where we'll go through that in quite a lot of detail in terms of what the situation is there for the beach and what else we can do with yourselves to try and provide a good solution for people who want to bring their horses to the beach in Cockburn Sound going forwards. So yes, absolutely, it's been a very key consideration. It's unavoidable that we had to have an impact on the horse beach, but we do really want to work with you about sort of future steps in that space. So we'll get your details and invite you to that session. Brian's asked, why was Bunbury Port rejected to handle containers destined for the southwest region? So Brian, this is a little bit this is a little bit more in terms of the work that was done as part of the stage 2 process. So I'll talk a little bit off the cuff because I don't have all I can't recollect all the data from that. So first of all, the cost, it would have just cost more to have a ship stopping in Bunbury and then having to build container handling equipment and operations in Bunbury for the very small amount of containers which do go to the southwest. Most containers and most goods that go to the southwest actually come into staging and distribution centres in Perth, and then the goods are unpacked from those containers and they're put into distribution trucks. For example, you'd see a Woolies truck driving down to the southwest. You don't see a container bought by Woolies, because what they do is they dedicate that truck to that shop. It's one of the Woolworths shops in the southwest, and drive down there. So ultimately, the cost of having an additional container terminal in Bunbury for the limited demand wouldn't have worked. Andy Bentley has asked, at what point of construction will focus start to move to the dismantling of Freo and the commencement of the full migration? Yes, so we'll start doing that thinking well before the construction starts, Andy. So obviously a very detailed transition plan where everyone knows exactly what needs to happen will need to be completed before we commission the new port. But certainly as part of the next phase, there'll be a lot of work with industry and others around the transition planning. And that's not just about transitioning the stevedores down, but that's transitioning all of the other operators down to to the Kwinana location as well, just so everyone has a very clear view about when and how that might happen. And obviously we'll need to work with industry on that. At that point, we'll start to also come up with some of the plans for the decommissioning of Fremantle, and that will be done in concert with the work that's been done around future Fremantle on the non-container trades to see how that'll be staged. So yes, that we've identified that there'd be a substantial transition period, probably about 18 months to 2 years between the port opening in Kwinana and Fremantle fully closing down. It might be less. We can hope for that, but we'll see. But there will be further planning done at that post-business case if the government wants to proceed with this project. Okay. Okay. All right. Now I've gone on a little bit. So, and I know there's still a lot of questions we haven't got to. So Sarah, Andy, Anne, and David, we do have your questions there, but we do need to wrap up. So we're going to take those questions offline and either provide a bit of a response out. And if they do focus all in the similar area, we might organise a specific session to look at some of those going forwards. So look, thanks all for your time this afternoon. I hope that's been a bit useful in terms of just building a bit of understanding of where we're at with the program and what we're doing going forwards. As I said, it's the beginning of the series that we'll come back to you about further, and we will come back to those questions that we haven't been able to get to this afternoon. Thank you very much.